what he's trying to do. But I like it. Look at this.
That got Uzdemir's attention.
Wow. They both possess power. Whoa!
Oh, stiff jab from Prochazka.
Champion.
Jiri
Prochazka is the reach.
Jiri Prochazka is a unique character with a unique skill set.
And his opponent, Teixeira.
And Joe for Rashad. The throw, the takedown. He got it. It's it. Glover Teixeira. Wow. Wow.
UFC 275, the oldest UFC champion ever, one of the most experienced champions of all time, Brazilian veteran Glover Teixeira defends his belt for the first time against the young, exciting, explosive challenger in Jiri Prochazka. Will the touching Glover story, the ultimate comeback tale, continue? Or will Jiri continue to win the hearts of fans with his unorthodox kill or be killed style? This is definitely a matchup to look forward to, and we here at Athlete Central are here to tell you everything you need to know about it in this Ultimate Fight Breakdown. Form. Let's start off with the champ Glover Teixeira. He was 2-3 in his last 5 before embarking on his win streak, losing to fighters that came up short at the most important moments like Rumble Johnson, Alexander Gustafsson, and Corey Anderson. After his loss to Corey, Glover took a step down in competition, facing prospect Carl Robertson. Glover managed to end the fight early on in impressive fashion. The Brazilian was unfazed by the American's power and submitted him with an arm triangle choke 3 minutes into the fight, using his excellent Brazilian jiu-jitsu. His next fight was against another unranked opponent, the Hulk, Iwan Cutelaba. This fight was a bit tougher for Teixeira as he absorbed some damage but came back to choke him out in the second round with a rear naked choke, a beautifully executed submission. He went back to facing ranked opponents after that, fighting against Ukrainian Nikita Krylov. The Brazilian managed to get a convincing victory even though it was a split decision. 75% of fans thought he won, and 30-27 for Glover was the most common scorecard, hence why the split decision was surprising. But Glover still got the W. This earned him a crack at the top 5, with the UFC booking him against Anthony Lionheart Smith. Smith was doing really well in the first round and managed to crack Glover a couple of times, but he proceeded to waste a lot of energy chasing the finish. Teixeira bounced back in the following rounds, brutalizing Lionheart and smothering him on the ground. The third and fourth rounds were actually scored as 10-8 for Teixeira, and the referee had seen enough in the 5th round to stop the fight. A lot of fans were actually lambasting Smith's corner for not throwing in the towel in the 4th due to the sheer amount of damage he was taking. Glover's next fight against Santos was what earned him the title shot, and it went pretty much like the Smith fight. Santos hurt Teixeira in the first round and went chasing for the finish, but Teixeira bounced back in the same round and started hurting Maheda. The second round was more of an onslaught from Glover until eventually in the 3rd round, he secured the rear naked choke and submitted Santos.
You are the most prolific finisher in the history of the UFC light heavyweight division. Congratulations on an amazing performance, man.
Teixeira was then a heavy plus 215 underdog in his title challenge against Jan Blachowicz, but he definitely proved the odd makers wrong. Jan didn't look like himself that night, while Glover, in contrast, looked exceptional. His striking was better than the Poles, and when the fight got to the ground, he secured a second rear naked choke in a row, claiming the title of oldest UFC champion in history.
I love this is my house. I look at the blood. I look everything over here. I've been here before. Well, not in Abu Dhabi, but I've been in this octagon before. And man, this is my house, man. I love this.
Moving on to the challenger, Jiri has only had 2 fights in the UFC prior to his title shot, and that's because he was Rizin's defending light heavyweight champion before signing with the biggest organization in the world. His fights in Rizin weren't against the best competition, so we'll just quickly skim through them. Prochazka is on a 10-fight KO streak, which is absolutely insane. In his stint at Rizin, he KO'd the likes of King Mo, Fabio Maldonado, CB Dalloway, Brandon Halsey, Jake Hume, and most impressively, current Bellator light heavyweight champion Vadim Nemkov, showing off his impressive striking arsenal in the process, which caught the UFC's eye. Fun fact: Prochazka was actually approached by the UFC earlier in his career, but chose to decline the offer because he did not think he was ready yet. And when he signed for the promotion, he wanted to get into the UFC while already being considered one of the best in the world. He didn't want a stiff competition while he was still developing. Safe to say, it has definitely paid off, since as we mentioned, he has only had 2 fights before his title shot. His UFC debut came after the Dalloway win, when he debuted against number 7 Volkan Oezdemir, as Dana thought the former Rising champ ought to be thrown straight into the deep end. The fight was extremely entertaining. Jiri was moving forward with a unique style, his hands down and chin up in the air. Despite eating some shots from Volkan, the Czech Republic native was definitely landing the more impactful shots and managed to secure the KO with an overhand right in the second round. His last fight against Dominic Reyes was the one that earned him the title shot. Reyes was coming off a controversial loss to Jones, which many thought he won, and a loss against former champ Jan Blachowicz, whose stock was as high as ever after his performance against Israel Adesanya. This fight was undoubtedly harder for Jiri. There was a lot of back and forth, and Prochazka himself admits that at one point in the fight, he was knocked out. He doesn't remember what happened. He rallied right after that though, and after pouring an onslaught on Reyes, landed a beautiful spinning elbow to knock him out cold. A moment that will forever be played on UFC highlight reels.
Attributes.
Let's talk about their measurements first. Teixeira is 6'2", only an inch shorter than the 6'3" Prochazka. However, in the reach department, the Brazilian is at a pretty big disadvantage. His reach of 76 inches is 4 inches shorter than Prochazka's 80-inch reach. The fighters are at a completely different points in their careers. Glover is 42 years old, in the twilight of his career as the oldest champion in UFC history, while Prochazka is only 29, which makes the fact that he already has 32 fights on his record very impressive.
Striking.
Before we jump into stats, it's important to consider that Glover has been in the UFC for 10 years, with plenty of ups and downs throughout his career. Prochazka has only had 20 minutes of octagon time, which might make the stats a bit less credible, but we'll take a look at how he performed in those 2 bouts against Oezdemir and Reyes. Logically, we would expect Jiri to have the better striking and Glover the superior grappling, so let's take a look at what the stats point to. Since both of Prochazka's fights have been insane high-paced wars, his significant strikes landed is absolutely enormous. He lands 7.19 significant strikes per minute. That is almost double Glover's 3.72. He has a better accuracy too, at 52%, 4% higher than Glover's 48%. That might not be a good indicator though. In both the Reyes and Oezdemir fights, the fighters on both ends were damaged and not defending strikes too well, so you would expect his accuracy to be a bit higher in those fights. In terms of striking defense, again, given the nature of those wars, Prochazka's whopping 6.8 significant strikes absorbed per minute does not come as a surprise, and it is 3 higher than Glover's 3.83. Teixeira's defense is better too, standing at a very good 54%. The Brazilian's boxing is actually very underrated. He is a master with the hands and on the mat. Jiri has a defense rate of 48% in his 2 fights. When it comes to power, even though the 17 KO TKO wins on Glover's 33-7 record are nothing to be scoffed at, they are actually outstanding statistics. Jiri has won a whopping 25 fights in that fashion, so only 3 of his wins have not come via KO or TKO. Will he extend his knockout streak to 11 at UFC 275?
Grappling.
In the grappling, we expect Glover to have a big advantage, so let's take a look. Teixeira lands an average of 2.11 takedowns per 15 minutes, which is very impressive across a 10-year career in the organization and shows that he is very consistent and dominant with his grappling. Jiri, on the other hand, has attempted and successfully landed 1 takedown in his 20 minutes of fight time, pitting his accuracy at 100%. Teixeira's accuracy is not the best, standing at 39%, and that is because every fighter that prepares for him knows his wrestling threat and prepares specifically for his takedowns in order to be ready for what's to come. In terms of takedown defense, Jiri has been taken down once and also defended 1 takedown in his 2 fights, putting his defense rate at 50%, and Glover is 10% higher at 60%, even though not a lot of takedowns are attempted on the BJJ black belt. Teixeira has put his belt to use a lot, attempting 1.1 submissions per 15 minutes, while Jiri hasn't attempted 1 yet. He does have 2 sub finishes on his record, but that was in small promotions, landing 1 rear naked choke and 1 triangle choke. Glover has 11 submissions on his record, and 7 of his UFC wins have come in that fashion, with 4 of his current 6-fight win streak also being due to submissions. His go-to is the rear naked choke, which he has mastered at this point, but he also has the arm triangle choke and the guillotine in his back pocket. So if we look at stats, Prochazka has a striking advantage and Glover has a pretty big grappling advantage.
Prediction.
This is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. The catch is that Glover is actually very well versed on the feet as well, and in recent fights, he has shown that his chin is made of granite. If he stays on the feet, it is essentially a question of whether Jiri's power is enough to put Glover down. Will the damage that he has taken prior to his domination in recent fights be too much for him to handle when he comes up against such an accomplished knockout artist like Jiri Prochazka? However, it's not even certain that Jiri will outstrike him. Glover did very well on the feet against former champ Jan Blachowicz, who outstruck kickboxing standout Israel Adesanya. Glover has some really crisp boxing, but he does not use kicks that often, something that Jiri can take advantage of. Typically, with a reach advantage and a good utilization of kicks, we would say that it would be a question of whether the fighter with shorter reach, Glover in this case, will be able to get into the pocket and implement his boxing. However, with what we've seen from Jiri so far, with his crazy style, it is unlikely he will strike on the outside and utilize his reach. He is the type of fighter who dives straight into the fire and explodes on his opponents, so Glover will most likely be within distance to strike with Prochazka. Maybe Jiri's coaches will devise a different game plan given the magnitude of a UFC title fight and play it more safe. But we find that highly unlikely. One thing they definitely do have to work into their game is takedown defense. Glover's grappling is one of the best in the entire organization. He is a great wrestler and an even better submission artist. And Jiri does have a submission loss on his record, with Teixeira's favorite submission, the rear naked choke. It is a question of whether Glover will also change up his game plan. Given Jiri's power, he might not afford to survive an early onslaught and use his chin and cardio in order to then dominate the fight. Teixeira's coaches may choose to rely on his wrestling from the get-go, since the fight on the ground seems to be a clear mismatch. Teixeira is clearly the superior grappler while on the feet. Jiri's technique, power, and style would pose challenges to literally anyone in the division. The champion is a plus 155 betting underdog in this bout, with the challenger, Prochazka, being pitted as a minus 180 favorite. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Who would you guys put your money on? Drop your fight predictions in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe to never miss an Athlete Central video. Until next time.